In this video, I'll be teaching you how to air flare. The air flare is arguably the most difficult fundamental power move to master. Comparing the following videos, you can see different people air flare with different techniques. There are variations to the way people throw, kick their legs, and the angle of their bodies. In this tutorial, I'll be teaching you how to air flare the way I learned, which should result in a similar technique to mine. Before learning the progressions, it's helpful to have an understanding of the move. The air flare can be conceptualized in a few ways. The analogy I find most useful is to think of the air flare as a windmill, but elevated on the hands. Both moves rotate around two axes simultaneously, share similar body postures and leg swing technique, and rotate roughly 180 degrees with each repetition. The air flare can also be conceptualized as a flare variation. This just involves more steps. Flares in their pure form stay facing one direction. To bridge the gap from flares to air flares, you must first spindle the flares by adding a second axis of rotation. From spindle flares to air flares, the hips must be elevated and the arm throws across the body rather than planting by the hip. Finally, the air flare is sometimes described as a swipe without the legs touching the ground. This can be misleading as the swipe and air flare have very different leg motions. There are, however, some similarities between these skills in which this idea becomes useful. Both use a similar arm swing with the arm throwing directly across the body, and both rotate around two axes simultaneously. As windmills, flares, and swipes are all easier power moves that will teach you skills transferable to the air flare, I recommend mastering these before pursuing the air flare directly. In addition to these power moves, there are prerequisites you should have before learning the air flare. Firstly, you need to be comfortable with a handstand. Secondly, you should be comfortable with a pike freeze on both sides, as the air flare involves throwing from and catching in these positions. Being able to perform single hand hops on both sides and handstand walks in a circle will also speed progress with air flares. Breaking the air flare down, the skill involves generating momentum, usually from the power move entry, before entering a pike freeze on one side. Notice the body turns to face the sky. From here, the skill continues by jumping through the star shape in the air to an L kick or a mild pike freeze on the other hand. Then both hands are planted as you transition back to the initial pike freeze. The body is angled roughly 45 degrees throughout, although you can perform air flares with the body angled higher or lower. You can also start the skill from a handstand and generate momentum by winding up, but in this video, I'll be teaching from and including the basic power entry, as I feel this is generally easier. If you feel more comfortable starting from a handstand, after winding up, the skill continues in the same manner, transferring to a pike freeze and jumping to the other side. Now that the technique has been covered, you can use the following progressions to work toward the air flare. In this tutorial, I'll be demonstrating in the counterclockwise direction. Start by learning the power entry. This involves a cartwheel pattern in a circle. Start with your legs split slightly and perform a cartwheel pattern on the spot. The left leg kicks back and the right hand plants, then the right leg kicks back and the left hand plants. After this, the right hand lifts before the left foot lands, then the left hand lifts before the right foot lands. When you are comfortable with this, you can practice it in a circle and perform multiple repetitions in a row. Over time, aim to place the right hand roughly where the left foot was. Gradually progress the proximity to vertical so you're able to transfer to the pike freeze comfortably. When you're comfortable with the power move entry, do this with very little momentum and transfer into a pike freeze before exiting to the feet. As this becomes consistent, practice transferring into the pike freeze and doing a small hop on that arm. This hop is useful for learning to generate height, which will later be used when throwing the other hand. Once you are comfortable with the hop, you can enter with more momentum and practice throwing the free hand across the body as you hop with the goal of catching in a slight pike freeze on the other arm. Once this arm is landed, simply exit to the feet. A common mistake here is shooting the legs to the ground by kicking the leading leg back. Make sure you don't kick back or let the hips extend past neutral, as this will result in your weight not being on top of you when you catch. As this phase can be scary, I recommend practicing this over a soft floor. Earlier I mentioned the throw should resemble a swipe. This will give a nice star shape when airborne. I like to pronate my wrist and internally rotate my arm. This ensures when I land, there is ample room to rotate on this arm before planting the other hand. As you get comfortable with catching and working toward multiple air flares, you can learn to take the move to windmill or flare as an interim if you find it easier. This is especially useful for those who find their body drops as they try to continue. As these transitions become smooth, try to keep the hips elevated as you work toward doing 2 air flares. If you don't have difficulty catching on the arm with your weight over you, you can practice transferring back to a pike freeze on the initial arm and work toward multiple air flares. Initially, the skill may feel disjointed and your power will diminish, but like learning the windmill, over time you'll learn to swing your legs in circular motions to maintain power. Notice my legs swoop very close to the ground as I transfer to the pike freeze. As I throw, the right leg horizontally abducts or swings out to the side as the hips extend just prior to being airborne. Although it usually comes naturally over time, you can practice these leg swing techniques against a wall as demonstrated here. As you become competent with swinging the legs, you will be less reliant on the pike and can perform air flares with a more open posture throughout. I hope this tutorial helps you master the air flare. If there's another skill you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments below.